Greetings. In this video, we're going to be talking about the essentially three different types of brokerage relationships within the state of Florida when operating and working as a real estate licensee professional. So there's mainly three different types of relationships. Almost, not all the time, but most of the time there's only two different types of relationships that are more commonly used, especially in residential real estate. That's not to say that the third relationship is not ever used. Um, Most of the time within the state of Florida, a lot of times, especially our brokerage, we highly recommend you operate as a transaction broker, but there are very unique and specific circumstances where you might want to operate as a single agency relationship. So in this video, we're going to be discussing about the three different types of relationships and how they're used, the responsibilities of them, and what our brokerage recommends that you use for your transactions. And this is just our professional advice and opinions. What you do and how you represent your clients is completely up to you. The listings that you have and the situation that you have going on with your real estate transactions. So before we do get into the video, just quickly, our company is Niz Realty Inc. We're licensed in the state of Florida at the time of making this video, hopefully other states in the future. Our brokerage pays all of our agents 100% of their real estate commission. This means you keep completely 100% of your commission. More information about our brokerage can be seen in the description below, or feel free to contact us for a confidential consultation. And if you'd like more information, reach out to us. For now, we're going to get straight into the video because I don't want to waste much time with talking about our company. As always, I want to get straight into what we're talking about today because that's probably why you're here. So, as you can see with this document I have pulled up, it talks about the brokerage relationships here. Now, you have the single agent relationship, the first one. You have the transaction broker, which is the relationship that I highly recommend that you always operate as whenever possible, as a transaction broker. You have a non-representative of the owner down here. That's also known as a no brokerage relationship notice, or no brokerage relationship, as you can see there. And you also, this is not a different relationship, but you have the single agent with consent to transition into a transaction broker. That means you initially start off as a single agent relationship, and then you could transition into a transaction broker if a buyer contacts you. So with that being said, let's talk about that, the single agent relationship. So we have here a single agent notice form. This basically discloses to the client, seller, buyer that you're working as a single agent. And as you can see here, here are the duties that mainly pertain to a single agency relationship: dealing honestly and fairly, loyalty, confidentiality, obedience, full disclosure, accounting for all funds, skill, care, and diligence in the transaction, presenting all offers and counteroffers in a timely manner unless a party has previously directed the licensee otherwise in writing, and disclosing all known facts that materially affect the value of residential real property that are not readily observable. So, one of the main, you can read through all these different things here, but one of the main things about a single agency relationship, just to simplify it, is there's a lot more liability put upon the realtor when you have a single agency relationship. There's the loyalty, as you can see here. One of the main things is, let's say you're working for our company, Niz Realty Inc., and you're operating as a single agent for a residential listing. Let's say you're selling a single family home. Because you have a single agency relationship with the seller, you're not supposed to be working with any buyers who want you to represent. So if a buyer contacts you directly and says, I want to work with you in your listing, I don't want to get another realtor, I just want to work with the listing agent directly, under a single agency relationship, you technically can't represent that buyer and complete that transaction. You'd have to tell them to find another realtor, and you couldn't even appoint them to a realtor within Niz Realty Inc., our brokerage, or your whoever brokerage you're working for, because with a single agency relationship, technically the entire brokerage, any agents in the brokerage, including the listing agent, should not be working with that buyer because you owe the utmost loyalty to your client, and you're not supposed to represent both sides. That you can't have a single agency relationship and represent the both sides. So That's why, as we discussed earlier, there's the single agent with consent to transition into a transaction broker, and there are agreements for that where you could work as a single agent and then you have a buyer contact you and you now want to work with that buyer so that you don't have to work with another realtor. You earn the full commission and the buyer maybe just wants to work with you directly, doesn't want to get another realtor. That's what you would use that form where you consent to transition into a transaction broker. So essentially you will have a single agency relationship, and then you basically sign some additional documents off on your seller and the buyer that basically stating that you're transitioning now into a transaction broker to represent both parties as a transaction broker and complete the deal without anyone else involved. You can do this. In my professional opinion, I don't really, it's just extra work, and to me, I don't like to put one extra liability, unnecessary liability, in my opinion, but it's extra liability, and two, making more extra work. More things for the seller to sign, more things for you to sign, more documents to keep filed and so forth, transitioning to a transaction broker. So I really recommend just working as a transaction broker, especially in residential real estate. Just always work as a transaction broker. Uh, the liabilities and chances for you getting yourself in trouble with something you may do, making an error, is a lot less. And you can represent a buyer. If the buyer contacts you, there's no additional paperwork you have to do. You're working as a transaction broker. If a buyer contacts you, great, you just start working with the buyer and you facilitate the deal as a transaction broker. You could represent both sides. And as you can see here, here's another notice of transaction broker. And discuss you could read through this. I'm not going to read through all of these, but it has the different things that you have to disclose of your duties. Most of the time, the transaction broker notice is incorporated into your contracts, so you don't have to worry about that, but it's here if you need to use a separate notice. So my recommendation is definitely always operate as a transaction broker. There's very rare situations where you'd want to operate as a single agent, especially in residential. But with our brokerage, one of the main things of our policy is if you're going to be operating as a single agent or a non-transaction broker, I ask that you contact the company broker to verify what exactly you're doing, what's the specific situation that you feel the need to operate as a single agent. And, depending on the circumstances, we'll approve that type of relationship, but normally I prefer to operate as a transaction broker. So that is what I recommend. Single agency is just a lot more liability, and it makes more work and more difficult to work with a buyer if a buyer were to ever contact you. So the last relationship to talk about is a no brokerage relationship. I don't see this too often. I have seen it and used it in very rare situations, and I've seen it in very rare situations. Most of the time when I've seen the no brokerage relationship, it's usually, not always, but the times that I've seen it, it's usually like an investor, and they kind of want to handle the transaction for the most part on their own, but they're just utilizing the real estate broker or the licensee for maybe collecting some additional information on certain things, or just there for some minor consulting, in which case they use a no brokerage relationship. And as you can see here, the duties are just dealing honestly and fairly, disclosing all known facts that affect the property value, and accounting for all funds if they're entrusted to the licensee. There's no loyalty or any of the other things that you see in the other relationship here. So I don't really recommend operating as a no brokerage relationship. There's very, very rare situations where I've seen it used and used myself. Most of the time, like I said, it's used for not just investors, but I guess individuals or entities that pretty much want to handle everything on their own for the most part. I've seen this used, and they're just using this to have a broker or a realtor accompany them with the transaction, like be a part of the transaction, but mainly there for just minor consultation. For the most part, the client is usually handling most of the facilitating the deal, but that's not always the case. Either way, I very rarely see the no brokerage relationship. Really don't recommend it, like I said. To keep things very simple and summarize this video, I always recommend operating as a transaction broker. It's just so much easier, so much less liability. You can work with the seller and the buyer. Um, it's just a lot easier to do. I always highly recommend to operate as a transaction broker. There's very rare situations and unique circumstances where you'll want to operate as a single agent or a no brokerage relationship. Um, and then, like I discussed, the consent to transition is just additional work. Might as well just operate as a transaction broker to begin with. So definitely just I highly recommend the transaction broker relationship, but depending on what you have going on, the type of relationship, maybe your client requests it. If you're a part of our brokerage in Israel Inc., I'd recommend, as you know, you're supposed to contact the broker to notify the company and the broker of going into that type of relationship. Before you do, we always highly recommend, it's not required, but we recommend a transaction broker relationship. Um, but if you feel the need otherwise to operate differently as a different, as a single agent, or the no brokerage relationship, I recommend you consult your broker. But the purpose of this video is to discuss the three relationships, and basically the major differences between them and how I've seen them used in my professional advice, opinions, and what I've seen just in the business. So hopefully this video was helpful and you understand the relationships a little bit more. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you.